just like to welcome to the stage Maurice Hamilton and Louise Goodman.
Thank you very much. What a nice welcome.
Well, Louise has come all the way from Oxfordshire, so we're very grateful to her for fighting her way through all of that terrible traffic and getting there. So, Louise, let's start at the beginning. So, where did you grow up, and what were your early influences?
I grew up in Hampshire, so not a million miles away, in a town called Alresford, which Formula One fans might recognise as the home of the Warwick family as well. So I used to walk past Warwick trailers on my way to school every morning, and I didn't know anything about Dirkie with stock car racing at the time. Occasionally he'd appear in the local paper, but I did know there was a really cool Mark II Ford Capri, an orange Mark II Ford Capri that was always parked outside the factory. So that caught my eye at a young age.
And on the screen we have a picture of you on your motorcycle. So we'll come on to Louise Goodman, the media personality, in a second, but probably less well known Louise Goodman, the traveller, and even less well known the motorcyclist. So
well,
can you tell us about that?
Sadly, not my bike, I'm afraid. But I passed my bike test. Kind of courtesy of Eddie Jordan. He agreed that I could have the time off to go and do my test, because back in the day, trying to get, well, it's still not the easiest journey, but trying to get into Silverstone for the British Grand Prix was an absolute bloody nightmare, and I thought that would be a really good reason to be able to ride a motorbike. I'd spent a lot of time up to that point on the back of motorbikes, and I would say half of my misspent youth was misspent on the back of mates' motorbikes. So I thought, I'm not going to my grave not being able to be on the front and in the driving seat on a bike. So Eddie gave me the time off to go and do a crash course and got my bike test. And I then proceeded to get myself into all sorts of trouble by sort of suggesting, like there I am, I could probably. The reason that bike's on the peg is it's too bloody heavy for me to hold up on my own. I made the mistake one year at the British Grand Prix. I thought it's a really good idea to do a feature with David Coulthard. We'll get some motorbikes in. So we did. We got some Harley Davidsons, and they turned up with a monster, it was like a 1,000cc bike. And at that point, I thought, what have I done? Because if anybody knows the roads around Monaco, it was, the hills that we were going up and down. And thankfully, I got up there and down again in one piece. But I do love the wind in my hair, and I especially love a bit of travelling. That picture's actually in Hawaii.
Oh, I thought it was Australia, but Hawaii, very, very exotic. So let's pick up your story then, because I think your love of travel and getting into journalism kind of coincided, and we've got a picture here of a powerboat. So what's the story behind this?
So the story behind this is, I always loved travelling. From an early age. I think parents wouldn't really do it in this day and age, but, my parents would put me on the bus in Winchester, and I'd kind of go down to Somerset to see my grandparents when I was like 6-7 years old, and Mum would sit me behind the bus driver with my ham sandwiches and say to him, keep an eye on her, and off I go. So loved travelling. I travelled around the States with old mates of mine, a lady called La Curtis, and she is the daughter of Clive and Anne Curtis, who set up and owned a company called Cougar Marine. So they had a business down in Hamble, so not far from where I was in Hampshire, but they also built big offshore powerboats out in the States as well, in Hallandale, just north of Miami. So I went out to stay with them in the States, and whilst I was there, met the then editor of the magazine, a lady called Ros Nod, who'd come out to do a stateside issue. So I kind of hung out with her a bit. I acted as her photographer. We actually got an amazing scoop in the factory of a guy called Don Arano, who had a company called, he made cigarette powerboats, they were called. Very them, beloved of Cuban drug dealers, as well as powerboat racers. But so Ros and I were kind of trotting around the factory, and she kept saying to me when nobody was. In fact, Don had said, "I'll give you to one of these guys can show you around." And this guy made the mistake of basically thinking. I mean, in me, he was dead right, an absolute novice who hadn't got a clue what she was looking at. But Ros, knew powerboats, she'd raced powerboats, she was the editor of the magazine, and so she'd be smiling and nodding at this guy and then say to me, "Go get onto that boat, and I want a picture facing backwards up the hull." And so we were doing all of this, and at one point he suddenly, once we got all of the shots, Ros said, "So I just wanted to double check with you, was that a double wet layup with the 147? And this guy's jaw just absolutely dropped, because you could see him thinking, "Oh my God, what have I done? Where have they been?" So we actually got some scoop pictures. But when I came back to the UK, she offered me a job on the magazine. So yes, I had a few happy years trotting around Europe.
As a job as what? Were you a journalist?
I was a journalist. That's where I learnt my journalism, basically.
I was going to say, what training, if any?
No, it was on the job training, as it was really for a journalist in those days, wasn't it? You didn't go to college to learn journalism. So, no, I started from the bottom up and worked my way up.
And Ros was a good editor, because that's so important, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a publishing company called Ocean Publications, and they had a range of sort of specialist magazines. So there was one that was on sailing, ours was powerboat water skiing, there was one on skiing, so mostly kind of sporting related. So it was a really good place to learn, because it was a kind of, you had to do a bit of everything. You had to learn a bit of subbing, you had to learn a bit of, writing, you had to, so yeah.
So you then make the transition to four wheels. So how did that come about?
That came about as a result of the Virgin Atlantic Challenge, so which obviously we knew all about, because we were in the powerboat racing world. We knew that, in fact, Coogan Marine were building the boat that Richard Branson was going to be using. And so we'd been across it for a long, long time. And there was a big sort of PR company were issuing all of the invitations to people to go along. And in fact, we didn't get an invitation, which Ros was a very feisty lady. I learnt a lot from her. So she rattled a few cages and managed to get us an invitation along to that event. And at that, I met a guy called Tony Jardine, who a lot of people will probably be familiar with. So
Tony came and talked to us last year.
Yeah. So Tony was just leaving CSS Promotions, which was the PR agency that was doing the work for Branson, and setting up on his own. So we actually met properly at a mutual friend's barbecue. We'd met briefly at the launch and then met again at a mutual friend's barbecue. And I just overheard him saying that he was looking for somebody to work with him when he set up his business, Jardine PR. And I was looking to go away travelling again, so I wanted a sort of an easier job in theory, so that I could get an evening job as well to earn extra money for my travels. So I went to work for Tony. I was his first employee. And
of course you really hit the ground running, because that first assignment involved the Camel Lotus team and Ayrton Senna.
Yeah, so RJ Reynolds decided that they were going to come into Formula One sponsoring the Lotus team. So we were charged with doing a big launch down at Heathrow Airport. And it was, we had Tony had a kind of brick of a mobile phone. You remember the ones that weighed an absolute ton. We had one phone line. We were actually working. We had a gorgeous little office that was up in the corner of the roof gardens, which was owned by Richard Branson. So I'd walk to work in the morning, like past the flamingos, and it was a bizarre scenario. And in that office, if we were getting a fax through from RJ Reynolds, we had to unplug the phone and plug in the fax machine. So we're trying to pretend that we're this like big all singing, all dancing agency, and we can handle this for you, no problem. On the day, I'd got my mates in there stuffing press packs and on the welcome desk and all sorts. So it was really in at the deep end. And then, sorry.
I was just going to say that is one tough gig, was it not?
Oh, it was. It was a really tough gig.
Because you've got Ayrton Senna and you have Peter War.
Yes.
Running it. I didn't envy you, but being a journalist trying to talk to them, and you were trying to do the PR, the bridge between us and them was very difficult.
I was a very naive, I'm just doing everything. If Tony said jump, I said how high, because I really had to be guided by him. And I did have one funny scenario, actually, because Tony was looking after, so once we'd had the launch, so Steve Ryder, funnily enough, hosted the launch. Steve tells a funny story about that as well, because he'd gone up there and put all of his notes on the lectern before the launch started. Tony Jardine came up, said a few words, and probably picked up his notes and Steve's and walked off stage. So poor Steve was left doing this entire launch with none of the notes, with everybody's names, and that shows you what a professional Steve is. He managed to make his way through it. But after we'd had the formal part of the proceedings, I was looking after, for the journalists who wanted interviews, I was put in charge of Nakajima, and Tony was obviously looking after it and sort of
So
media.
your job title was press officer. That's what you were effectively.
Well, I can't remember what my title was then. It was like, do anything that Tony's not doing,
had to
girl,
be done.
basically. Yeah. So, and at one point, Ayrton disappeared. So Tony sent me off to find him, and he was back behind the curtain from behind which we'd done the big reveal of the car. And so I wandered around. There he was, just getting out of his overalls. And in my naivety, I mean, had I thought about it, I just went up to him and went, mate, you're not finished yet. Grabbed the zip, pulled it back up, pulled it out. And I think he was so gobsmacked at being woman-handled by this youngster, like, that he'd never come across before. He just kind of trotted out after me. But it was like, my boss said, I've got to find Tony, said I've got to find him, so off I went to find him.
Great story, a close encounter with Ayrton Senna so early in your career. Just amazing, yeah. So a few years later then Nelson Piquet, of course, ended up at Lotus, and how was he to deal with?
Well, to be honest, thankfully, by then I wasn't having to deal with him too much. Tony was looking after kind of the main Camel sponsorships, and I had to look after the sort of ancillary. So they sponsored, obviously, Lotus was their main sponsorship, but they also sponsored LaRousse, they sponsored Tyrrell, they sponsored various other teams, Benetton. So I was charged with kind of, after the sessions, going to get the quotes from those drivers. So Nelson was one of those drivers. Honestly, he was a bloody nightmare because, he just knew I was a very young, naive girl. He played with me, and he was appalling, basically. He wouldn't get away with that kind of stuff these days. As was, name escapes me, lovely Italian guy who was racing for Benetton at the time. Nannini, yeah. I mean, he was just horribly flirtatious. I never knew where to put myself. But it was a good training ground.
We'll not do any national stereotyping there on the fact that he was an Italian.
It's a good training ground for learning how to slap racing drivers, which I then made a mainstay of my career as a press officer.
So staying on with the theme, you then moved on to the Leighton House team then?
Yes, so that again was through the sponsorship. You can see the BP on the nose and the engine cover there. So at Jardine PR, we got the contract to look after the PR for BP, so who were sponsoring the Leighton House team. So that was really my first job of being the main press officer for a team. So I was still working for Tony just down the road in Walton-on-Thames. Actually, that's where our offices were based. But I would go off to the Grand Prix with the team. In fact, funnily enough, the guy who was the boss of the team, a lovely man called Ian Phillips, who I'm sure some of the people in the room will know, Maurice and I know very well. Ian was the boss at Leighton House, and when Tony first said to him, we've got this young girl, she's going to come along and be your press officer, Ian said, no, I don't want to go. I'm not having a girl. Just disruptive, and no, don't want to go on the team. And Tony, bless her, said, well, no, honestly, she's quite good at it, and she doesn't take any nonsense. So Ian really had to be persuaded. I mean, he's still a really good mate, and in fact, I think it was about 20 years before he ever employed a male press officer again, because he kind of thought, okay, these girls actually can get these drivers to do stuff that boys sometimes struggle. I think racing drivers find it a little bit more difficult to tell a girl to piss off when she's, than they did a bloke. That was my theory anyway. So then I became the press officer for Leighton House, which was great. It was interesting, really interesting times. I joined the team at the same time as a young designer called Adrian Newey. Whatever became of him.
I was going to mention, I was reading an article actually in a F1 business magazine that the top 10 biggest mistakes ever made in Formula One, and obviously on that list, I don't know if everybody realises this, but in 1990, Leighton House fired Adrian Newey. Yeah. Who obviously went on to become the greatest racing car designer of all time, so that's a top 10 mistake. Yeah,
I mean, there was a big change at the team, so Ian left the team at the same time, and there was an accountant whose name escapes me, who
Keeble?
basically was...
Keeble, Simon
That's
Keeble?
the one, that's the one.
Yeah.
Simon came in and took over, which wasn't really a popular decision anyway. It was, these things happen. But yeah, I mean, to be fair, Adrian, you know, he was in the infancy of his designing days. He was very much the aerodynamicist. So, you know, we had a couple of occasions. So with the 1990 car, you know, it was all so tight. The guys had to cut off the end of their racing boots to actually fit their feet in, you know. So Adrian would design a perfect car aerodynamically, but then he'd forget somebody actually had to get into it and be able to turn their... I'm sure he'd admit this now. We had a very funny scenario actually where at the second race of the season in Phoenix, so we didn't introduce our new car at the beginning of the season, you could introduce it later on. So the new car came on board for Phoenix, and it was a bit of a disaster because, as I said, the guys couldn't fit their feet in, and they couldn't, you know, they were hacking away bits of the cockpit overnight so that they could turn the wheel. Adrian tells the story very well. He says that, you know, I basically, and I do remember trying to elicit from him, again in my naivety, if the last car was good, why isn't this one doing the same thing? Why did we not stick with the last one? And I think I worded it slightly wrongly though. So Adrian shouted at me, which, you know, for Adrian to do is, he doesn't really shout, but I could tell you he was upset. So I went to Ian Phillips and said, I think I've just upset the designer. And unbeknownst to me, Adrian also went to him and said, I think I've just upset the press officer. So we were both, but, you know, that car, we had flashes. We went from neither car made it through pre-qualifying at the Brazilian Grand Prix and then cut forward to the next race, and we were running first and second at the French Grand Prix.
Yeah,
so,
that.
You know.
You had Ivan Capelli.
Yes.
A lovely guy.
Yes,
Right.
Ivan and Mauricio Gugelmin, who were both lovely guys to work with. You know, we were kind of roughly the same age, and I think that's when the balance became easier working with the drivers. They would still give me grief, but it was you know, in a friendly way. They'd you know, I can remember one time, on occasion, we were doing an appearance at a BP petrol station somewhere, and I could see them chatting, and then, like, you know, they beckon me over, and you kind of think, oh God, what now? They're going to complain it's too hot, or you know, and they, Ivan looked at me and said, was the hamburger, is possible? And I went, no. He went, okay, I thought so, but we have to ask, you know. So they would just joke about with me, basically.
Okay, so you then moved on, and funny enough, it's a thing that the three of us all have in common, because we've all at one time in our careers worked with Eddie Jordan. I was first. I was in there when he was right in his very early days in Formula 4 and Formula 3, working for him relatively informally. And obviously Maurice ghosted, was that the right word, yeah?
I wrote a fly on the wall book from 94, 93.
And Maurice has told me subsequently that if you talk to Eddie will swear blind that he wrote every word of it himself.
Oh yeah, no, he did. I also ghosted his autobiography, which came later, and he swears that he wrote it himself. And so
Eddie swears a lot of stuff.
Well, he does. Yeah.
Do you know what? There's a kernel of truth in most of what Eddie says. So the book was about him. Yeah. He just forgets the bit that he didn't actually write it, you know. But there is always a kernel of truth in whatever Eddie said. But there's so much topspin on it that, you know, he gets lost. And once he's said it enough times, he's one of these people that believes what he said. You know, I can remember him telling me and Sonia Irvine about how he'd sold Eddie to Ferrari, and this had happened and that had happened. And a guy called Andy Stevenson, who is now the sporting director, we were skiing and we were all in the lift together, and we were looking at each other and we were like, we were all there. And he's telling us this stuff that didn't happen. We were all there, you know. Why is he? But bless him. He never lets. He's a really good example of never get the truth. Let the truth get in the way of a good story.
So just backing up then slightly, the transition. Then how did the transition from Leighton House to Eddie? How did that come about?
Well, that sort of came about because Tony sold me, in the sense that we were doing some work for, it was a cigarette manufacturer, I can't think which it would have been.
Barclays?
Peter Stuyvesant, so it was, and Eddie had sponsorship from Barclays. So there was basically an issue with Tony having an association with two rival cigarette manufacturers. So in theory, I went to work for Eddie. Actually, I was still working for Tony the first year that I was working for Eddie. But no, I just went into it. I'd worked with Eddie very briefly via Camel, actually, because Camel sponsored Eddie's Formula 3000 team. So I did one race with Eddie Jordan Racing as their press officer in Formula 3000, the race at Po, with Sean Lacey and Martin Donnelly were the two drivers that we had. And then the BP deal came up, so that's when I switched over to doing Formula One full time. So I was actually, I'd always got on well with Eddie, so to go back and work with him I thought would be great. So yeah, that first year, Tony called me into his office and said, oh, by the way, you're moving, you're going to work at Silverstone. It's like, great, thanks, mate. You know, I live in London. A little bit of advance notice would have been fine. But it worked out fine. So I worked up there, travelled to and fro for a few months, moved up there. And in fact, the following year, I sort of officially went to work for Eddie. Yeah, and thereafter ensued many happy, entertaining, and amusing times.
I was just going to say, having done that fly on the wall book with you for a year, it struck me as being a really happy team in every respect. You know,
it was, you know, we had a real work hard, played hard attitude. And Eddie, you know, Eddie's a character, as everybody will know. And I think at the time, not so much nowadays because they tend to be more corporations, but back then the teams were very much dominated by the character of the person at the top. You know, Ron Dennis at McLaren, everything was very particular. Williams was very much engineering based, and Jordan was about having a good time and getting as much money off as many sponsors as Eddie possibly could. So with a bit of rock and roll thrown in too. So what's not to love about that? So
talking of rock and roll, tell everybody about what you did at Monaco for one of your drivers' 21st birthday. Do you remember?
Yeah, it was Rubens Barrichello's 21st birthday. So actually, Chris Rea, who some of you may know is a big car fan, particular fan of Ferraris, but he kind of, I can't remember how the initial contact came about, but he just became a real mate of Jordan to the extent that he actually came and did a rehearsal for his God's Great Banana Skin tour in an empty area of the factory. So we asked Chris. Rubens Barrichello was going to turn 21 at the Monaco Grand Prix. So Chris, bless him, recorded a sort of bossa nova version of Happy Birthday, which we then had a word with the race organisers at the Monaco Grand Prix and arranged that they would put it on as the drivers came out of the drivers' briefing on a Friday. So Rubens, and this was going around the whole circuit with Chris singing.
Can you imagine that today?
Yeah, absolutely not. It just wouldn't happen, would it? But yeah.
But it was a bit of a theme of the Jordan team, because it was very small. I mean, these days, hundreds and hundreds of people in teams. But I think it was probably, 50 or something people in the team?
I was employee number 47 when I joined, and that was that was everybody. That was everybody in the machine shop, you know, manufacturing the car. Absolutely everybody, office staff, you name it. So
although you were officially press officer, there was obviously lots of other things that you had to sort of.
Well, we used to joke about the fact. So I was the media department effectively. That was, you know, it was just me. Ian Phillips by this point was also at Jordan. So Ian was the commercial director. So we used to joke, you know, those are two Eddie's favourite things in life are being rich and being famous. So we used to say, okay, who's going to have a busy day today? Does he want to be rich today or does he want to be famous today? So yeah.
And of course, among his drivers was Eddie Irvine, who's a distant relative of mine. My mother's family is called Irvine, and I don't think I told you this, but
commiserations. Actually, I shouldn't say that because his sister Sonia is one of my bestest mates, and I love the family.
She's the physio, and I don't think I told you. My aunt taught him.
Oh well.
And she said he was actually quite quiet in school. The sort of playboy image that emerged later in life, that he wasn't like that at school. He was quite quiet at school. Can you see that? The real Eddie Irvine?
The stunned look on my face probably suggests that. No, because of the stories I've heard about him. He was, you know, he's always been a bit of an introvert. In this day and age, he'd be diagnosed with ADHD. I'm absolutely certain. You know, he 100% would. The stories poor Sonia tells about having to, you know, he was impossible by all accounts to punish, because you could say to him, right, you go to your room and you're not coming out for 3 weeks, and he'd go, oh, okay. And you know, off he goes. So maybe that fits in with the narrative that he was actually quite quiet. But
Yeah.
He's always been, he's very, and Maurice knows him well too, he's very, very shrewd. I mean, the guy was a millionaire before he ever came into
He's the
Formula One.
brightest, one of the brightest Formula One drivers I've ever met.
One of the first trips we ever did, this was back in the day when all the drivers had a carbon fibre briefcase, that was the big thing, and they'd open it up and it would have like a copy of Autosport and a Walkman in there, and that was about it. But one of the early flights I took with Eddie, he opened up his briefcase and he took out a copy of The Economist, The Financial Times and Autosport, and that's the order that he read them in. The Economist, then The Financial Times and then Autosport. So he's actually very shrewd, very sharp, and does a very good larrikin, I don't give a monkey's, act.
Yeah.
It's partly self-defence, I think.
Well, he developed that playboy kind of image, didn't he?
Trust me, that cap fits.
Yeah. But underneath it all, he was deadly serious about his racing and his career, absolutely.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't set foot in a racing car till he was 16, 17 years old. That just wouldn't happen in this day and age.
No karting.
They're spending hundreds of thousands on karting at the age of 10, so...
Yeah. The great thing in his favour was that he didn't care what anybody thought. He just got in and did it, didn't he? He had no preconceived idea. He was quick.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm quick. All right, and that was it. There was no argument. Did you have a problem with him when he could be a little bit offhand with the press if he didn't like them? Did you?
Yeah, I hesitate to say this in front of a man with your accent, with your accents, but I think it's a slightly Northern Irish self-defence mechanism.
Yeah, we are like that,
Yeah, so...
What do you mean?
So you are. Yeah, so I think everybody was always a bit of a, whatever, don't care about him, just in case said person turned around and said, I don't think much of him. Eddie could say, I already said that. It was So he didn't like to be seen to be making too much of an effort. He liked it is him as well. As I say, I'm sure he'd be diagnosed as being ADHD in this day and age because his focus would shuffle around, as is so often the case with entrepreneurs, I've discovered as well. So he would, but actually underneath it, he was in many ways, he turned up on time. I used to have to juggle with, if anybody's ever worked with a Brazilian, I know Dick's here, so he will know, working with a Brazilian, absolutely impossible. They're never late. Sorry, they're never on time. An hour late, they think they're early. So we used to have to juggle. I'd have to say to Eddie, we're leaving to go to a sponsor engagement at 6:30 p.m. And I'd have to say to Rubens, we're leaving to go to sponsor engagement at 5:45 in the hope that they turn up at roughly the same time. Because if Eddie came down first, he would not want to be seen standing. This is another racing driver thing. They don't want to be seen standing waiting for another racing driver to turn up. So Eddie would say, I'm not waiting for him. I'll call me when he's here. And so I'd have to kind of juggle and get the pair of them there at the same time.
And there he is, said Rubens. Yeah, you worked with him for quite a few years, actually, at Jordan.
I did, yeah. I mean, he joined us. He was, really the sort of the next big thing coming out of Brazil. Very much the kind of baby, and I say baby because he'd always been the youngest in, been very successful in coming up through the ranks. But he was quite young in his attitude. So, and whereas Eddie was really. As we said, he had that, you couldn't faze him. Rubens was actually quite easily fazed, which that was really my first example of racing drivers playing mind games with each other, because Eddie used to have such fun. Like Rubens would say, so what gear are you taking such and such a corner in? And I would say, I don't know. And Rubens was like, well, how does he not know? He's taking it in fourth. He just doesn't want to know. And I think because a lot of the people on the team were Irish as well. We had Gary Anderson, our designer, was Irish, and so I think Rubens did sometimes worry about the Irish mafia ganging up against him.
So I dug this photograph out. An interesting occasion whereby the two sponsors, the two tobacco sponsors, owned by the same parent company, and they decided to do a driver swap and put Colin McRae into a Formula One car. That
was Colin's birthday. I can't remember how old he was that day, but it was his birthday. And he'd always wanted to drive a Formula One car. So, for me, this was like manna from heaven. This is like a great little PR stunt. That's one thing Jordan was really good at, was doing PR stunts, you know, and Eddie was always very open to that kind of thing as well. We would have people, you know, get married or turn up and do pictures in front of the garage at the British Grand Prix. You know, another team would say, well, I don't think so, that's not really, and I'd think the son would love that, I'll have a bit of that. So, and this was one of those stories that I knew was just going to get a lot of attention. So we put Colin drove the Formula One car, and Martin drove the Subaru, and you know, we had a lot of press, a lot of publicity. We got cameras in the rally car. Colin was very upset when he discovered actually he had to sit in the passenger seat of said rally car whilst Martin was driving it. He wasn't. He really had to be like, no, I'm not. I went, you are, mate. You are. You're getting in that car. And in fact, if you see the footage of it, you can still see it online. You know, you can see Colin's face. He's absolutely he's not having a good time. Martin's having an absolute blast, hacking around the lanes around Silverstone Circuit. But then Colin said to Martin, so, you know, when I drive the car, like, you know, talk me through the start procedure. Martin said, I don't know how many revs it would have been, like, you know, line it up, whatever revs on the clock. Colin, being Colin, decided he'd, like, stick a bit more on, you know. So when he left the sort of the grid, the old grid at Silverstone, I was standing alongside David Richards, and it was then Bross, the pro driver, and this car just came fishtailing down the main straight. David and I both like ducked down behind the pit wall because I thought and I'm thinking, the car's got to go to Spa next week. I'm going to be in so much trouble. But it was great. I mean, at the end of the day, Colin absolutely wrung its neck, had a blast, and then Martin, you know, got the bug for rallying. So he, you know, he then did Wales Rally GB on a couple of occasions.
Oh, right, okay, I'm not sure I knew that actually. Yeah, very good. So I'm going to set the audience a little test now. I'm going to ask them to identify the person in the next picture. Who is that? Can anybody tell me who that is? Well done. That is Captain Murray Walker, who was a tank commander in the Second World War. So we've sort of jumped ahead a little bit on the story. Louise, so you obviously made that switch from working for a team and being the press officer and then moving into television.
Yes.
So can you tell us how that all came about?
Well, it was when ITV was taking over the contract from the BBC. Yeah. ITV at the time was very much regional, and it didn't have the facility on a centralised basis to do the production of the Formula One programme. So they basically put it out to tender. So I think there were about 5 or 6 different sort of production companies, or in my case, it was a merger of Mac One, it was known as. So it was Meridian Anglia, both regional ITV stations, and Chrysalis Television, who got together, and they approached me and said, are you interested in, you know, being on our team? I'd done tiny little bits of television for RTE, the Irish broadcaster, when I was the Jordan press officer. They'd just give me a microphone and a headset, and during their commentary they kind of, let's go down to Louise in the Jordan garage and talk us through the pit stop or something, but really very, very little TV experience. But they came to me with this concept, and I sort of thought, oh, go on then, put my name down, you know, sort of. The perceived wisdom was that actually it was going to be one of the other companies bidding that would get the gig, and then lo and behold, it was little old Mac One were announced as the as the winning bidder. So it was I mean I think. If you come to me and said, right, this is the deal, you're going to do this, you're going to do, but the fact of the matter was they approached me with this vague concept, and even when the bid was announced, there was a gap between that and Bernie Ecclestone actually looking at the plans, the way that they were going to do the programming. You know, BBC, you know, you had James and Murray there. Tony Jardine was a pit lane reporter, and that was pretty much about it. They'd have a cameraman and a producer with them, whereas we were going big time. You know, we were going to have various different presenters, and
of course, Murray made the switch. Of course, he moved across from ITV.
Murray made the switch across.
Yeah.
But this all had to be approved by Bernie Ecclestone, so there was a bit of a gap. And during that time, everybody found out who was on the presentation team. So by that point then, when they actually were in a position to say to me, okay, we can offer you a contract and this is how much you're going to be paid. For starters, this is how much you were going to be paid was like, oh my God, that sounds good, you know. But also, you know, everybody by that point thought I was doing it, so I didn't really have the nerve to say, no, go on, you're all right, thank you very much. You know, so I just kind of leapt in. That has been really the story of my career. Just dive on in, you know, see what happens. I'm sure it'll work out okay in the end. So it served me quite well. But it was nerve-wracking to say the least, you know. I had no training. They literally gave me a microphone and said, off you go. You know, I sat down with James Allen, bless him, who was the other pit lane reporter, who'd kind of been sort of instrumental in getting me on board.
Is he in this
that's James, yep, far right in the picture.
Right,
so this is sort of pretty much the original gang. Yeah, they sent me off into the pit lane in our first race in Melbourne. And said, there you go. And to the extent that, you know, we would do kind of technical checks and audio checks in free practice on a Friday. But, you know, they said, oh, just give us something for level. I was like, I don't know what that means. What do they mean? I don't know what. They'll just say something. Okay. What do I say? I don't know what, you know, really, I think, you know, they didn't employ me for my broadcasting skill. They employed me because I knew the people in the pit lane, I knew the sport, I knew what to ask. And I think importantly as well, I knew when to ask it. So they either took somebody and taught them about Formula One, took somebody who knew about broadcasting and taught them about Formula One, or the other way around. And, you know, luckily for me, they went for somebody who knew about Formula One.
When I talked to Neil Duncanson, who was the head of Chrysalis,
yeah,
he told me that they were under huge pressure at that first race in Australia because everybody was expecting them to fail because there was adverts coming in. Well, nobody wants adverts.
Yeah.
Did you feel that pressure at all? Because he felt it, but he had the experience. You probably didn't.
I felt a very personal pressure of, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to make a bloody idiot of myself. You know, it was just really along those lines. Because as I say, I was just kind of going in blind. I think they were so busy trying to learn the business of what they were doing that nobody had time to teach me the business of what I was doing. I think what was really nice was that Martin, who's in that picture, you know, he had spent the last year of his career as a Formula One driver at Jordan with me as his press officer. So we'd both moved over at the same time. In fact, unbeknownst to Martin, I was sitting in the motorhome with Eddie Jordan when Eddie basically knew that he wasn't going to be re-employing Martin for the following year. So was desperately trying to flog him off to ITV so that, you know, and in fact, Martin reminded me of the story that I was the one who actually told him that his Formula One career had come to an end because Eddie's never been very brave in giving people bad news. And I was saying, Eddie, we're announcing the new drivers tomorrow. You've got to tell. Martin at this point is still thinking he's in with a chance. So Martin says, yeah, he got a phone call from me to let him know that his time as a Formula One driver was over. So, but I think it was great for both of us. We were very much in the same situation. We kind of didn't have a home in the paddock anymore because when you've worked for a team, you know, you're with that team the whole time. But we didn't feel like we quite belonged in the TV compound either. But at least we had each other to moan to and like both say, I don't know, do you know what you're doing? No, I don't know what I'm doing either, kind of thing.
But Neil also said that in this situation, Murray was an absolute rock. To have Murray on board was just to...
Because he was just you know, he was the status quo that was taking us through. He was the one constant that, and I mean, you know, Murray was a national icon, you know, back then. So the fact that we had Murray with us was a key thing. Murray, I think, was on every single bid because who wouldn't want to have Murray with them as their commentator? So, but you know, he definitely helped smooth the waters for us. And I think, to be honest, you know, Bernie, I think, quite like Neil Duncanson's bit of a geezer. You know, very shrewd businessman. I think Bernie quite liked that because there was a bit of a sort of similar vein going on there.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So you obviously moved on through your career through the next several years, interviewing all the greats. Is that Schumacher?
That's Michael. Yeah, interviewing Michael. Yeah, it was. I think once I'd found my feet, and I think by the end of the first year, I felt like my hand had stopped shaking and my voice had come down to a normal level. Whereas it had started up here because I was saying really fast. But I think we really benefited from the fact that. As the British broadcaster, a lot of the drivers would, and Michael was a classic example, the drivers would go and speak with their national broadcaster first of all, but then if you've ever heard a native Japanese speaker trying to interview a native German speaker, sometimes something gets lost in the translation. So a lot of the drivers, and Michael was a classic example, would kind of come to me to ask the questions on behalf of all the British speakers so that he knew he was going to get sensibly phrased questions that he would understand and could answer well, and everybody else would just, as you can see there, there's a whole load of microphones diving in. You can also see there, that's Gary Anderson, the former technical director of Jordan, who took my job at RTE. How dare he? But so Gary then did some, and still does do a little bit of broadcasting. But yeah, it was It worked well. I think the drivers, as I say, would come straight up. There they were.
And so Fernando Alonso, another example then.
Yeah, and Fernando. Yes, I mean that's a job. That's actually at the Singapore Grand Prix, doing GPTV. So that's a job I still do. Not in Singapore because Formula One have got the contract back there, but in Melbourne every year, I'm part of there's a big team that does basically just a circuit TV, but it's a huge operation. It's, all day long. It's like a live broadcast across the 4 days in Australia of the Grand Prix. So it's great. When I discovered that ITV was pulling out of Formula One, the first thing I thought was, shit, I've got no job. And the second thing was, I'm not going to go to Australia every year. So it was fantastic when they came along and said, well, come and do our circuit TV. So, and Fernando, I think, is a classic example of a driver I've loved interviewing, right from his early days. I think he's just always been... He had a little bit of an edgy time with the British media around his McLaren days, but I think, we'd established a good enough relationship at that point that he was always quite kind of good with me, and he's a...
Did you have a favourite driver that you thought, oh great, I really love talking to him because I get, apart from Fernando, get good feedback, get good, Mark Webber or something like that?
Mark was always easy to talk to. DC was always easy to talk to. I think there's no coincidence that the drivers who were easy to talk to are the ones who've gone on to have careers in broadcasting, with the possible exception of Ralf Schumacher, who now has a career in broadcasting and who was
really?
Could be a little tricky to interview, but I think because I'd worked with a lot of the drivers, that really helped, and because a lot of the drivers, Johnny, Eddie, Jean. Damon, we'd all come up sort of through the sport at the same time and knew each other well. And I think for me, I'd always worked on the basis of, you want an interview to be a bit of a conversation, and actually the more relaxed somebody is with you, the better you're likely to get out of them. And in fact, Eddie Irvine was a classic example of that. There was one occasion at the Hungarian Grand Prix, and I can't remember exactly what I asked him, but as he was answering, the press officer side of my head was going, you really shouldn't be telling me this. And the journalist side of my head was going, that is a mega line I just got there. And in fact, he came up to me afterwards and said, I just got a bollocking from the boss. I said, well, I'm not surprised. I was amazed when you said, he said, I forgot. I just thought I was talking to Lou. Well, that's kind of what you want to be achieving.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting that conflict, having that being on both sides of the fence, as it were. Yeah, that conflict going on in your head. So, is it true that you were the first person to interview Lewis Hamilton when he first won the title?
Pretty much, yes. I mean, that was a massive bun fight. It was ITV's last race. All of those years we've been following Michael Schumacher winning the championship, and finally we get a Brit. And that was our last race. But I always always tried very hard to be the first person to get to a driver, because I just think if you get them raw, you're going to get the first reaction. By the time they've answered the same question for the 10th time, they've lost a bit of the enthusiasm for it. So it would, and it's a lot more organised now. You'll see people, they get officially taken to the bit. That was actually something that we TV journalists said, listen, this is turning into an absolute mess. The drivers aren't happy. It's not working for all of us. So let's actually come up with a slightly more structured way. If you guarantee you'll bring all the drivers to us, because previously, prior to that, we would just all hang around at the bottom of the stairs as the drivers were trying to come down out of the media centre after a press conference. And it was, every man or woman for themselves, dive in and get what you can. So, but I was determined to get the first interview with Lewis when he won the championship. But by this point, they got a structure for the top three. Of course, Lewis didn't finish in the top three, and they didn't think to actually include him in the procedure for the top three, because they said, no, he's not in the top three, and you think, he's the guy everybody wants to talk to. So it was a bit of a mess. I think a couple of people, as he got out of the car and was walking back down to the team, got brilliant. But then he was back with the team. So, but I was determined I was going to have this one. And by this point, it was absolutely chucking it down with rain. But I was kind of elbows out as he came out of the team. And again, that's footage you can find. And the camera is going here, there, and everywhere. At one point, there's a shot of me with my headphones off the side, because it properly was elbows out. I'm getting in here, but I just felt that was our interview. The British people, I think, deserve to hear from their new champion first.
Absolutely.
Going to the other extreme, do you think now with the interviews that we see, they're all managed, and the PR person standing over the tape recorder over the driver's shoulder, are they all sound bites now? Is there less impromptu?
Well, there's less access, full stop. And I mean, that's been part of the downside of, one of many downsides, but as a result of COVID, when obviously it was impossible. You couldn't have a whole array of different microphones being put in somebody's face. So basically the teams all relied on Formula One to do interviews with the drivers, and then that was then given, be it in broadcast format or the audio files were given to journalists to transcribe. And of course, and I understand it in a way, because there is a lot more call on the driver's time. The teams are, generating a lot more material for themselves, for their media purposes, for their marketing purposes. So it's really, really difficult for broadcasters to get quality time with Formula One drivers these days. It's just the way it is. You'll get something after qualifying, you'll get something after the race, but you'll really struggle to get something on a Friday afternoon.
So Louise, I think I'm right in saying you remain to this day the only female who's ever participated in a live Formula One pit stop.
On a wheel, I think I am, yes. I mean, you'll see, engineers, data engineers and the like diving in and doing bits and bobs these days. But yes, I was, rear left, wheel off.
And can you tell us briefly the story behind that?
Well, it came about, I was actually standing watching a pit stop with the BAR team, and I was chatting with Alistair Gibson, who was their chief mechanic, and he said, hey, you ought to have a go at this. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I don't think any girl's ever done this. Why don't you should have a go at this. You could be good. So I kind of thought, actually, that would make a really good feature for the British Grand Prix. And this was back in the time when ITV, as the broadcaster, actually produced all of the footage, the race footage as well. All of that now is all done by Formula One, but we were the host broadcaster, so that meant we controlled the cameras, so that meant that if I did the pit stop there, we could actually show me doing the pit stop. The
camera would be on you, yeah.
So I trained really hard with the BAR team, which is fair enough, from about 5 Grand Prix out, I was going to pit stop practice twice a weekend with them. And then, so we were all set up with ITV to do a feature, a big piece on the Saturday in the qualifying show, and then a big piece in the Sunday in the race show. And then obviously we'd show me doing the pit stop live in the coverage. And then I got a phone call from Gilles de Ferran, who was the sporting director, who was also a good mate, which made it even worse. He said, Louise, and this is the Monday of the Grand Prix weekend, he said, Louise, I'm really sorry, but we've just had a meeting and when you can't do the pit stop. It's like, what? I've been training for this for months. Everybody does it for a first time at some point. And this is, I must stress, this is, we're in refueling days, so you've got 6 or 7 seconds. It's not like it's crucial to do it in a second or anything. So anyway, they were not to be persuaded. And so now I'm left in a position where, we've got 2 great big lumps of holes in our in our shows. So I put in a call to Andy Stevenson, who had been a grubby little number 2 mechanic at Jordan when I first met him, but by this point was the sporting director. And I said, Steve, I've got a bit of a problem. I explained the situation. He said, yeah, you can do it with us. I said, would you need to talk? No, it's all right, you can do it with us, it'll be fine. But, you know, he said, it's not rocket science, is it? If a mechanic can do it, I'm sure you can do it. So it was like, well, that's great. So you can come along and, you know, have a bit. So I went and did some training with them on the Saturday, and we started, you know, sorry, on the Thursday, and we started filming the piece. And then, you know, we get to the Sunday just before the race, and Steve-O said, they weren't happy. And I said, what do you mean? He said, the engineers. What do you mean? He said, well, I've just told them. I said, you've just told them? They don't need to know this stuff too much in advance, you know. I told them you've been practising. I told them you can do it. They don't need to know. They're only going to interview. And the irony was, actually, Jensen went out of the race
in the BAR, the car that you were supposed to be on.
Before he even got to doing a pit stop. So had Plan A come to fruition, Plan A wouldn't have come to fruition because the car didn't come in to do the pit stop. So instead I did it on Diego Montero's car, and yeah, it all went well.
Good. And as you said, in those days it was like IndyCar. These days they were doing the refuelling, so it wasn't quite so hectic as it is these days. But that's still good. And can we see that footage online? Can we find that?
I think you can. Yes,
okay,
me jumping up and down, like, you know, I was ridiculously excited about it because you kind of think, yeah, I can do this. This is another classic. Yeah, that'll be fine. And then I'm in there thinking, shit, that thing's coming at me really fast, isn't it? I better not mess this up. And I'd had a bit of a shock as well because I'd been practicing so much on the BAR that when I came to do it on I think it was the Midland at the time, I kind of did the same action and nothing happened. And then they said, no, you need to hook your arm. So it was a slightly different action I needed to get this wheel off. So there was a nervous moment that, like, oh my goodness. So yeah, it was relief that it had all gone fine.
So we're going to play a little video now, which
The European Minardi team had no less than 5 two-seater Formula One cars at Donington, and the day certainly met with a roar of approval from the lucky fans who got to experience the thrill of Formula One firsthand.
Just awesome.
Amazing, absolutely phenomenal.
Businessman Jonathan Frost bid $55,000 in a charity auction for his chance to ride 2 up in a Formula One car, and Frost had a very special driver, former world champion Nigel Mansell. True to form, Mansell didn't spare the horses. Unbeknownst to his passenger, though, he hadn't seen anything yet. As always, the ITV Formula One pit crew were on hand to cast a watchful eye over the proceedings, but this time the job was a bit more hands-on than usual.
That was unbelievable. You know, I hope you're feeling fit because I've just done 3 laps and I'm absolutely creamy crackered. And you've got 12 coming up.
Why?
So it's physical. It's really physical. The G-forces on your neck, you know, we talk about them week in, week out on the telly, but you know, until you actually feel them, you know, massive loads either side through the craner curves, huge on the brakes. And once they get racing, you know, and they're trying a little bit harder and everything else, I think it's very physical indeed, Lou.
It's a rolling start and history is being made over the line. 5 two-seaters. The first Formula One two-seater race into Redgate, the first corner. Then on to the crater curves. Tarso Marquez leads from Brazil. Now we're riding with Nigel Mansell. 2 cars ahead of him as he comes out of Coppice down the long straight. That's Jonathan Frost. He paid £30,000 to be there and he's enjoying it. But now Paul Stoddart leads in the only red car. Watch it. Nigel Mansell going through on the inside. And he takes the lead as Tarso Marquez pulls out of the race and he's on fire. His passenger is literally having a hot seat. Last corner coming up. Alonso leads, Mansell challenging, Stoddart is in 3rd place and it's surely going to be Alonso winning the race. Oh, look at that, look at that. And Mansell looks perfectly all right. They were very, very lucky indeed.
They being Fernando Alonso and me in the back of his car.
Both of us just slowed right up coming out the corner.
Thankfully nobody was hurt in the accident, but in my experience the podium was a much more dangerous place. It was a day to remember in many ways. I've got this little souvenir of my Formula One experience. You've already put 1 mark on it. Just wondering if you
Is that my mark?
That's your time. Put your official one on it as well for me.
That hurt me, that picture on the podium. A bit of a surprise. He normally finds the right end of the champagne bottle, doesn't he, Louise? But you were there, Tony. Quite an eventful day by the sound of it.
I mean, she had a lump the size of an egg on the back of her head from that one. It was a real big hit, but we were very, very lucky because...
I did too. That hurt so much for weeks afterwards.
What was the brief of the story then behind the two-seater Formula One race and the accident of the last corner?
Well, so this was a lovely little bit of PR that Paul Stoddard had kind of cooked up. So he'd come up with he hadn't come up with the idea. We'd already had some two-seater Formula One cars at that point, but Paul built a fleet of them, so decided to have a race. Nigel was invited to come along. Obviously, Nigel was a big name to get on board. There was a certain deal that maybe it would, I think Nigel pointed out that the headlines would look good if Nigel won the race. So it was kind of, it did make sense for the story. So it was arranged that everybody would do a pit stop, and therefore, then when it all played out, Nigel won the race. I genuinely think what happened, and I keep meaning to ask him, but I haven't done yet, is that Fernando wasn't counting the laps. So I think when he came, so we'd actually overtaken Nigel going down the back straight at Donington just before the final chicane, and then I think he, as I say, wasn't counting the laps. He came around that final chicane and saw the checker flag and thought, I'm going to be in real trouble. I'm not supposed to win. So he just lifted. And of course, I think Nigel was so incensed at just having been overtaken by us going down the back straight. He was right on our tail, and yeah, so I just felt this big bash, and then there was a bit of a shadow, and then we were stopped. And I was like, mate, the checkered flags, I was just like, we can still get a second here. That's how horribly competitive I am. But yeah, it was, listen, the guy actually who'd paid all that money and went over the top of us, he paid the same again to have another go in it. He'd enjoyed it that much, so it was a great day. I actually, Stoddy had said to me, come in the back of my car, and I kind of thought, I don't really want to go in the back of Stoddard. I want to go with that bloke, Fernando Alonso, because I think he's going to be good. I think he could be a champion one day. So hence me being having Fernando as my driver.
And but for Nigel crashing into the back of you, you could be a Formula One winner.
I could have been, yeah.
Albeit in the second seat.
I'll take it.
So, quick preview now. This is where you two guys come in. That's both Maurice and Louise in the car. Maurice co-driving, left-hand drive car. So how did that come about then, Louise?
Funnily enough, when your face appears on television, people are slightly more keen to say to you, do you want to have a go in our rally car? So I'd actually, my intro to rallying came via Tony, who called me into his office one day and said, what are you doing at the weekend? I said, well, I don't know, don't really. He said, oh, brilliant. You're going to be my co-driver on the Wydeen stages. His regular co-driver had something come up and couldn't do it. So I had a crash course in co-driving, and off we went down to the Wydeen stages. And I just absolutely loved it. But I kept saying to Tony, go on, Gizzy go in your car. And it was like, no. So then I cut forward a few years, I'm working for ITV, and I was approached by the Ford Car Championship, and they said, do you want to have a go? So I was like, yes, I do, thank you very much. So I kind of took myself off. I went up to the Bill Gwynn Rally School, and Bill and the family gave me some lessons, and I had an absolute blast. I absolutely loved it. I had various different co-drivers, Vicky Butler-Henderson on a couple of occasions, and then when it came to the big stuff, you'd go to the top guy.
Yeah, Tony had got me involved, funnily enough, in rallying. I'd always wanted to do it, not to drive, but to co-drive. And in 1996, he suggested I co-drive him in a couple of events, and then we did what was then the RAC rally together. So I really had a hunger for it, and was doing odd events in between. And when I think you came to me and said, I said, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Because this was a well-structured little championship, wasn't it?
Yes.
The whole thing was very well run.
Which the Ford Car Championship? Yeah, no, absolutely it was. No, it was. I mean, I couldn't do all of the events because some of them clashed with Grand Prix. But I could do enough to gradually get my licence up to qualify to do an international event, and then there we are.
Here you both are on the RAC then.
GB.
Yeah, the RAC itself, or the Network Q as it was called, which was just a major event, and I mean, very, very serious event. A lot to do. We spent 3 days doing the recce beforehand,
which was a new experience.
Yeah, which we had to do, make the notes or check the notes. And we were just determined to finish, but to do well. But we had a bit of a hesitant start in the first day. Do you remember? The first day was on a Sunday, and the rally was based in Cheltenham.
Yes.
And the first stage was at a little place called Cornbury, a little stage, some stately home somewhere up near where you live,
yes,
I think, in
Oxfordshire. Yeah.
And the next stage was going to be Silverstone. We knew all our mates were going to be there to see us, so we had to get there. But we were at number 167, so we're way down the order. So we're 2 hours behind the leaders after they've gone through. So when you get a small stage like Cornbury, all the spectators are there, they're leaving. And they're on the same road that you are, and you're trying to get on. You've got half an hour to get to the next stage, and the traffic's everywhere. And
so I decided to do a little bit of overtaking. We were coming up to a junction, and actually one thing you discover when you're on a rally that the fans who are there to see the rally cars, they know the score, they understand what's going on. So the minute they see a rally car coming, they virtually throw themselves into the hedgerow, throw their cars into the hedgerow so that you can get past, because they know you're up against it, you're up against the clock. There was obviously somebody in this traffic jam trying to get onto the main road who wasn't a rally fan and who was not going to move their car, and what's more, didn't think I should be trying to overtake them because they had just every much as right to be in that traffic jam as they did, as I did, and blah, blah, blah. So I kind of, just as I'm going past them, a police car came in the opposite direction. At which point, when Maurice starts sliding down in the chair. So the police car kind of stopped, and in fact, we're in a left hooker as well. So
you thought I was the driver.
Maurice is sitting, then the policeman's right here, and I'm over there. So Maurice, by this point, you can barely see him. There's like a little bit of nose peeking out. He's pretending he's not there, and I'm doing my best. Hello, officer, how can I help you? Voice. So we got away with the telling off. But not before he scared the bejesus out of me by saying, I could have, this could be it. And we were only on about stage 1.5 at this point, aren't we? It's really early days, yeah. So anyway, thankfully, we went on our way. And I can't promise that was the last time we did a dodgy overtake, because when you're in a little car like that, it's difficult to keep the time up to. But yeah, we got away with it.
But talking of keeping the time up, the worst part for you, I think, was on the last day. And we were restarting from Cheltenham, and the first stage was at the bottom of the Brundle Valley. So we had an hour and a half to get there, which is fine, on the roads. But we were warned, luckily, by somebody who said, now watch it. You think you've got all the time in the world to get to the stage, but there'll be traffic queues at Severn Bridge. And then when you're getting around Cardiff, you're going to arrive at Cardiff about 9 o'clock. There's going to be rush hour traffic. So we bombed down the M4, past all these other cars that started ahead of us. We were going, what do they do? We thought, We get to the end of the M4, we have to come off a spur road where the rush hour traffic is, and all these rally cars have realised what's going on, and they've all arrived at once, and they're on a hard shoulder, they're trying to get past, and it was a pretty bad advert actually for rallying, because all these hooligans are trying to get in, and the rush hour people are not impressed, as they wouldn't be. But we had to go into a 10-minute service before we went off to the first stage, which was I'm going to say, don't you? We went to there's a place called Treforest, and the service area was in the car park for a multiplex cinema, and there was nothing there, and I mean nothing. By that I mean no toilets, not even a portaloo anywhere. And poor old Lou, we've had all this nervous energy expended on the way down, trying to get in the traffic jam, get into the service area on time, which we did just on the minute. We really did it, but it was very exhausting. You needed to go to the loo, nowhere to go. We've only got 10 minutes in the service. Sorry, Lou, we've got to go. We've got to go to this next stage, which is in a forest. So we got half an hour up the road to this stage, which is by a primary school. And all I can tell you is that the primary school children who were all out watching got an unexpected lesson in biology as the driver and co-driver rushed into the bushes.
It became a little bit of a rant of mine when it came to rallying, because when you're on a national event, you don't, there's this kind of, it's like girls to the left and boys to the right, because there is nowhere, you've got very limited time. But of course, when you're on a big international event, off to the left and off to the right, it's full of people, it's full of spectators. So yes. I did have to say to them, listen, you do need to arrange to have some ladies' toilets available in the service areas,
So, Louise, you brought something down in that bag. Do you want to look at it now? Can you get it? Will I get it for you?
Well, it's something that Maurice will remember well, but hasn't seen for a while, because I snaffled it.
Our cup.
So third in class, as I understand it, yeah?
Third in class, Wales Rally GB, get us.
Is Maurice allowed to touch it?
Maurice is allowed to touch it.
The lovely element of this is that we finished 83rd and 3rd in our class, which for us was a huge achievement. We actually did it. But at the head of the field were the Ford Focuses, the works Ford Focuses with Colin McRae, and I forget who the others were. And we were the only Ford to finish and got silverware. And I never let poor old Malcolm Wilson forget it every time I see it.
Top Ford.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad you've reminded me, because I'm not going to let him finish it.
No.
Not him forget that now either.
No, oh, well, that's brilliant, yes.
Top Ford and Rally GB, that's excellent, yeah.
Podium finish.
I mean, it was a terrific feeling, wasn't it? I mean, you've been through, for over a week, we've been working at this, and it's just, well, you did a brilliant job. We got there, and didn't have any big incidents, did we?
No, I got to the end of it and pretty much fell over. You know, I was absolutely drained. But it was really fascinating and such a rare opportunity to compete at the same time on the same. I say at the same time. Okay, mostly a couple of hours behind. But we did have a couple of occasions when a stage had been cancelled, so we'd got down that the big runners had been through, you got the midfield guys coming through, there's a big accident, so in order that the traffic can all keep up and you can get through the stages, they would cancel maybe a couple of stages for those of us who were running right down at the back. So there are a couple of times that because we were right down at the back, just because of the kind of class that we were in, we were on the road just in front of all the, you know, the Colin McRae's and all the stars. So we'd be driving through some little village in Gloucestershire in the middle of the night, and there are people on either side of the road should come out to see the big stars, and they get us waving frantically at them, yay, and loving every moment of it. But as I say, to be able to compete on those stages at the same time as those stars really was quite something.
So back to the day job, as it were, and then in the season 2000, then you wrote this book, Beyond the Pit Lane, which I must say is excellent. I mean, I think it's very nicely written, very easy to read.
Thank you.
And you know, terrific insight into the season. Now, Louise kindly brought 3. Amazingly, she didn't sell out of this excellent book. She had 3 left over, and she's kindly donated them all to the raffle. So anybody who's now regretting not buying a raffle ticket, you've got a chance of winning one of Louise's book. I mean, sort of jumping ahead slightly, but you know, as I said, I think it's written very, very well. You know, is there another Louise Goodman book?
God, no. It took so much. I mean, you know, I hesitate to say this in front of renowned author Maurice Hamilton, but I got the deal. I was approached. You know, my then agent said, "Oh, I've got a deal for you to write a book." So you think, "Oh, okay, all right." But as part of the deal, I had to deliver it a week after the final Grand Prix of the season, so it could be, you know, out in time for Christmas. So I really was under the kibosh, you know, never having written a book. There were times when I would just sit there at my desk thinking, I don't know what to write. What shall I write? You know, total writer's block. So I'm glad I did it. I can say I did it. But, you know, my partner then said, you know, if you worked out the time you spent on that, you are way below minimum wage, the hours that you put into it.
Tell me about it.
Yeah. But it's done. It's done.
Yeah, but if you did another book, it would be in your own time. You wouldn't have all the pressure, etc. I think
the really sad thing is being under that much pressure kind of put me off writing, which is such a shame because I always loved writing. But yeah, it's kind of put me off.
So a couple of characters that feature quite heavily in the book, David Coulthard and Eddie Irvine, a little bit of needle between them, but I think good-natured between the two of them, really, and you think they teased you a little bit as well?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we see it more now with DC. At the time when he was at McLaren, he was always very concerned about being seen to say and do the right thing. But, you know, David's always been really naughty. And, you know, people used to say to me back in the day, he's very boring, that David Coulthard. You think if only you knew. He is so not boring. You know, so, and he and Irv would, just have banter with each other, basically.
So I'll maybe just pass by that one and just go on to this. So this now, 2008 was going to be the last season of ITV. They then lost the contract, is that correct? So, but you knew that through the season, you did the whole 2008 season. And of course our president here, Damon Hill, that was a big day for him and for the team.
That infamous weekend. I was talking to somebody about this recently, and I was like, "My God, did all of that happen at the? You know, unbelievable." This was Spa
2008,
and it was it was just. I'd always said to Eddie when he first won a race. So this wasn't this. Just think of the chronology. Anyway,
this was their first win, wasn't it?
Yeah, this was the first one. And it was a 1-2 as well.
Yes.
1-2 France.
But I'd always said to Eddie, when you get that first win, I want to get the first interview with you. I really want that first interview with you. And sure enough, along came Spa, and that 1-2, that infamous 1-2 in that infamous race when absolutely everything happened. So I was really pleased. I got in there with my mic and I got that first interview.
Because it was such an up and down year, because I was doing my second book, Fly on the Wall book, with Jordan that year, and it was so bad. I mean, I set the whole thing up with a publisher, did the deal, got the contract signed, and started to do my research and talk to you and write it as I went along. The season was so bad that when we got to after Monaco, the publisher actually rang and said, we want to bin it. I said, we can't do that. They said they did. They said, because there's no story. Why are you doing a book about a team that's doing nothing? So I said, well, actually, can we make that the story? Can we make that, the struggle? Please. Anything at all. And it was really desperate at time, wasn't it? I mean, Monaco was a disaster. I remember Eddie went to his boat and wouldn't speak to anybody, which must have been a nightmare for you. He just locked himself away. And then we got this. Oh, hallelujah, Christmas Day. So we had a wonderful season at the end of it, but it hadn't looked good in the middle. But you had to deal with all of that.
Yeah.
So so Damon was quite pleased as well.
And relieved, I think, because there was a lot of controversy there about, that's when he famously came on the radio and said, right, Eddie, I'll say this to you once. There's two ways we can go about this. You can let us fight and you could potentially lose this, or you tell Ralph to hold station and you get the win.
Mm-hmm. And of course earlier Schumacher and Coulthard had come together, which sort of cleared the way for the win. Yeah. So at the end of that season, you're now potentially joining the ranks of the unemployed at the end of your ITV career, and this man potentially enters the scene.
Well, I just thought, but it was really interesting. Bernie was obviously a character, a person who loomed very large throughout my entire working career in Formula One, because he had such a control over Formula One. But I'd never had any sort of personal interaction with him really. But you'd always had people talk about the fact that Bernie looked after people, and Bernie was across everybody that worked in his paddock, and in fact
all the Brabham boys all ended up at the FIA and things.
Absolutely. And when ITV pulled out of Formula One. And I had no job. Somebody said to me, we'll go and have a word with Bernie. And I said, well, I can't phone up Bernie. He said, we're going to have a meeting. And I said, yeah, honestly, Bernie. So I kind of thought, ooh. So I phoned up, just wondered if I could see make an appointment to see Mr. Yeah, sure, Mr. E says come next Tuesday. And it's like, oh my God, what do I say when I get there? Do you know what I mean? But so I went along, and he walked in a few minutes later, apologised profusely for keeping me waiting, and just sat with me for half an hour and basically said, have you thought of this? You could try this. What about that? I can't give you a job, but you could have a go with that. What about that? And I just thought he didn't need to do any of that, and I think really that was a mark of what Bernie was like. If you were part of his family, part of his gang, and he could help. Then if he thought his favourite phrase was a good guy, that's what applied to you too. If you're a good guy, you were in. Yeah. You were okay, and he would look after you. Yeah. Really, really well. Yeah.
So you of course then made the switch to, we're jumping forward a couple of years now, made the switch to British touring cars, and you interviewing Colin Turkington.
I chose that picture well, didn't I, Dick? Yeah. Well, Dick Bennett, boss of the team over there. So yeah, I'd worked briefly in touring cars the year before ITV pulled out of Formula One, and I just instantly loved it. So I said, right, I want that gig back, and it's such an amazing championship. It really is. It's a lovely championship to work in. It's so welcoming. I'll often say, in Formula One, the answer is no, now what's the question? In touring cars, the answer is yes, now what's the question? I think we're, clearly as ITV, we're a much bigger fish in a much smaller pond, but the teams, the drivers, they all go out of their way to facilitate things for us, and it's just a lovely working environment. It really is. I just absolutely adore it. And the racing is bloody good as well. I'm regularly jumping up and down and shouting at the television when I'm watching it. It's just proper racing.
Yeah, of course, you're off to Silverstone tomorrow now.
Yes.
So they round up there. Of course, you and Steve Ryder have solidly established a bit of a double act on the BTCC.
What a pro Steve is. I mean, you know, I've been so privileged to work with people like Murray Walker. I mean, what a star Murray is, and what an absolute pro Steve is. And what I love about Steve is he just has the most wicked sense of humour that, you know, it hasn't always translated, I think, you know, in his sort of big broadcast days. Obviously, you can't kind of joke around that much when you're broadcasting the Olympics, but I mean, and that's you know, we'll have a reverse grid draw, so we'll kind of pick a bowl out of the fishbowl of destiny, as we call it. And there was one occasion when we didn't have a driver to pick the ball, so we'd said to Alan Gow, could you come and Gow being Gow, at the last minute said, go on Steve, you pick it. So Steve's there, he's got his clipboard in one hand, his microphone in another, and Alan's just being mean to him because he knows Steve's going to have to fumble around and pick the ball. Anyway, he did it, we went off to the break, at which point Steve turned to me and said, I used to present the Olympics, you know. You know, just, where am I now? But he's just such a great guy to work with. And every year at the Touring Car Awards, you know, Steve will turn up for the rehearsal and say, oh, has anything funny happened this year? Anything? And I'll throw him, yeah, maybe. And so he acts like he really hasn't thought about the fact that he's going to do like a half an hour, 20 minutes, half an hour chat at the beginning of the awards ceremony. He goes off upstairs, comes back down again an hour later and just delivers the funniest one-liners. He just rips into absolutely everybody, but he does it in such an elegant way that, you know, it's hugely entertaining. And I've learned a lot about, you know, throughout my career, working with people like Steve and Murray, you know, learning from the best really has been such a privilege.
So, well, we've seen you doing lots of interviews, but I think this is the first one in a swimming pool.
Yeah, this one I made up as I went along. This was without the advice of Stephen Murray. Yeah, this
Jason Plato.
Jason Plato at Snetterton. Snetterton's normally in August, so it's, you know, very often very hot there. And I think, you know, it's something you'll see quite regularly nowadays is drivers jumping in ice baths. I was just out in Singapore at the Grand Prix and everybody was making ice baths out of packing cases and you name it. But this was one of the first occasions that I think we'd seen it at touring cars. And I said to Jason, I need an interview. He went, well, come and interview me then, babe. You know, so I was like, well, okay, that'll make for interesting footage for the viewers. So, yeah, great character, Jason.
So this is the touring car gang. So what's going on there in that photograph?
This is after the last race of the season. So we will end our coverage of the season finale. BTCC presents all of the trophies on the grid. So the crowd are all there. It's fantastic. It's always dark by this point, so we've got to get all the lights up. You can see all the confetti that's gone off with the pops and bangs, and then we will all. It's become a bit of a tradition. Those of us that are down there, obviously, a lot of people are still in the production vehicles up in the TV compound, but those of us that can, we'll all gather round. So we'll have a monitor for the reverse vision, we call it, so we can see the programme going out. And it's the one time of the year that we run full credits for everybody who's had an involvement in the show. So it's a little tradition that we'll all gather around the monitor and watch those. Once Steve and Tim and Paul O'Neill have done the final interview with the champion, credits roll, and we'll all gather around and watch them. And it's just always a really special moment. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, people might ask you the question, you know, do you miss being involved in Formula One? But of course, you are still heavily involved,
yes,
albeit it's not visible to the general public.
Yes, I still work. I'm still jumping in and out of Formula One the whole time, doing various different things. This was a little online show that I worked on for a season. In the absence of the Paddock Club, they came up with the concept of the virtual Paddock Club. So, and this was just an interview I did at the end of the season, just a season review basically. But, you know, these are all the guys who I'd kind of grown up in the paddock with. So it's great. They're all now ambassadors for Formula One.
So it's Coulthard, Alesi and Jacques Villeneuve.
And Jacques Villeneuve. What a bunch of, you know, entertaining bunch for sure. So... Careful what I say here. But yeah, so that was a really lovely interview, and just to be able to shoot but we basically shot a 15-minute interview, which you never get to broadcast normally an interview of that length on traditional television. So yeah, it's really nice to still be in and around the paddock. But these days, without that intense pressure of I must get the interview, I must, you know. And I was in this is in Abu Dhabi. This is the season finale, and I was, you know, after that race, all the journalists were running around and the broadcasters were like, the scandal and what do you think? And I just had this like overriding, whatevs, you know, it's not going to change my life anymore, you know. It's quite nice to be able to go in and out of the paddock without it being the be-all and end-all.
Yeah, Abu Dhabi is always a great place to finish the championship, wasn't it? Because it's just a lovely place. The circuit leaves a bit to be desired, but the actual place, the facilities and everything are wonderful. Good atmosphere, climate's good. For me, one of the climaxes was when Nico Rosberg won the championship in 2016, and his dad was there, and I'd seen his dad win the championship. So to have them both here in this place, up on a balcony like that, it's just lovely. It's just it's not every circuit you get that, is it?
No, and I think, as you say, up on a balcony, I think it is one of those circuits just because of the layout and these amazing buildings that all of the teams have there. At times there's a very much relaxed atmosphere about it.
Last race.
Yeah, I was lucky to be there last year when Sebastian Vettel invited everybody to walk the track with him, you know, because he just thought that would be a really nice way to have his kind of swan song and his finale. So that was lovely. Everybody just set off and wandered around and...
So another thing you do, because you're well known now for passing on all those years of excellent media experience that you gained, you're now passing that on through a media training business.
Yes, so this is with some of the Aston Martin drivers. That's Darren Turner, you can see there with his hands on the back of his head. Funnily enough, I first met as a 17-year-old. He was working in the machine shop at Jordan Grand Prix, sleeping under his bench to save the money that he would have paid for his hotel room or his B&B, so he could spend it on a set of tyres. So, but yeah, I think I'd always known that, you know, I thought my career with ITV as you know, in Formula One, it was going to have a finite amount of time. I've managed to spin it out a bit longer actually, but I'd always thought, what else can I do that's within my control that I'm running? And funnily enough, somebody said to me up at the Autosport show one year, do you know anybody who does media training? I thought, oh, that's what I could do, because I've got a PR background. I've written, I've broadcasted. So and there wasn't really, other than Brian, I've forgotten his surname, at Brands Hatch, who was the only other person.
Brian Jones.
Brian Jones was the only other person really who'd done this kind of thing. And I think it's actually, I'm very much of the school of, for me, media training is not about producing boring, bland little PR machines, because I don't want that on the end of my microphone, but I do want a driver who understands enough and is confident enough to actually have an opinion and express that opinion, safe in the knowledge that they're not going to get themselves into trouble. So and because so many, there's such a demand these days for content, not just from the drivers, but from people within teams. And so I'm working with a lot of the Formula One teams, with their academy drivers, with their management, with everything from young karters up to the Formula One teams. And I'm busier than ever. And I've actually, you know, it's almost like I've sort of got a bit of a latent teacher inside me. It's really quite gratifying when you see a youngster that you first worked with at the age of, I mean, Lando being a classic example. You know, when I first met Lando, he was painfully shy and wouldn't say boo to a goose. And I'm not claiming any credit whatsoever for the Lando that we see now, but it's lovely to see that progression of these youngsters coming up through their career. And that's another thing that I get from being in the Toka paddock. You've got the Formula 4, you know, drivers coming up through that. So, but yeah, so that's I really enjoy the media training.
Yeah, so I wasn't sure if we were allowed to reveal that you trained Lando Norris, but that's obviously an open secret now. So that's good. We got that one out.
He talks about me the whole time to everybody.
So yeah, I thought we'd just include this photograph as we're nearly done with another late colleague, Sterling Moss. You've certainly worked with all the demigods in motorsport.
I love this picture because, I mean, Sterling was just such a gorgeous person as well, but still so naughty even at that age. You know, I can remember when I went to interview Sterling at his home on one occasion. You know, we had the famous scrapbooks, and there was the green pile and the red pile and the black pile, and I can't remember which one was. I said, well, what's that one? But oh, that's the totty, dear. That's for a totty. And so this was actually so that's Sterling with David Brabham. Yeah. They were doing an official photo shoot, but I let them do the official photo shoot, and then it's so unprofessional. It's not something it's like ingrained in you. You would never do it. But I thought, damn it, I'm going to do it. I'm going to photobomb them because I really would like to be in on that picture. So I just leapt in. And what we're all laughing about is the fact that I'm trying very hard. I'm terribly conscious of the fact that Sterling is no youngster. So I don't want to be putting a lot of my, you know, won't reveal how much weight on his legs. So I'm desperately trying to hold myself off. And Sterling, I can't remember exactly what he said, but it was basically, oh, don't worry, dear, just nestle on in there. And I'm sure, you know, he was so that's what we're all laughing about, is Sterling being typically Sterling and so naughty.
Marvellous. And a little moment at the end, I think, with Louise, with the late Murray Walker. A lovely photograph.
The much missed Murray. He was just such a lovely man to work with. Another great legend. And you know, one of my favourite stories about Murray was at the British Grand Prix one year. He was, you know, I think Murray, Sterling, they were men of their time. It was a different time, and Murray proved that one year at the British Grand Prix when he'd done an interview. I think it was with the Mail on Sunday or something like that, and big double-page spread, and it said something about blah blah blah, and you know, Formula One isn't really a place for women, and blah 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 blah. And I was like, I think it was James Allen, but have you seen what was I went? Murray, yes dear. I said, nice piece in the Mail on Sunday. Oh, thank you, dear. I said, this bit where it says Formula One's not really a place for women. Yes, dear, well, it's not really, is it? I mean, you know, it's. I said, Murray, yes, dear. I said, I'm a woman. He said, I didn't mean you. Oh, I didn't mean you, dear. Such a sweetheart.
Rob, could I bother you to go down to the back and just get the roving mic? Sorry, thank you very much. Well, that's a fantastic chat, Louise. We all absolutely loved that. We've sort of run a little bit over our normal time.
Sorry, that's me. I always talk too much.
Well, I didn't get the sense that anybody wanted to stop listening, so we obviously carried on. So Mike's just Rob rather's just getting the mic. We used to have Mike doing the mic, which was confusing, so now Rob does the mic. Does anybody have any questions that they would like to put to Louise that we haven't covered?
Louise, you've given us a wonderful evening, and you've mentioned a lot of drivers that you've interviewed. What about the team principals? Now, Eddie, we know. What about the rest of them?
As in, like, what were they?
What were they like to interview? Like the Rons and the Frank Williams and the like.
I think they were all pretty good to interview. Ron could be a bit tricky at times, just to kind of. I can remember going to do an interview with Ron at the factory when they were building the new factory, and. We were putting together a feature, and Ron said, so you're looking for sound bites? Yep, just want sound bites. And my first question, which you very often, your first question is kind of like a throwaway just to warm them up. Ron's answer was 12 minutes long. I thought, you know, I could see the cameraman like checking his bag, how many takes did I bring, because this is going to be so. But I think they were all, I think the only one who could be really tricky at times, and that was mostly because nobody could understand the bloody word he was saying, was Flavio Briatore. He'd spout off something and you weren't quite sure what to follow up with, because you weren't quite sure. We used to joke about the fact that we ought to subtitle him on the screen, you know, because it's like, what's he saying? Nobody really knows. So no, they were normally pretty good. I think part of their job, one of the things that they knew that they had to do, and some of them would try and be a bit more manipulative than others, and you know, get their point across. But
I was just going to ask Lou, who's your favourite? Well, who's your favourite touring car driver to interview, and who's the worst to interview?
Do you know, I genuinely don't have a favourite, because I think most of them be pretty good in their day. You know, someone who's had a good race and is full of it is always going to be good to interview. Conversely, somebody who's had a really awful race, sometimes you can get a good interview from them, even if it's not always a pleasurable experience, but it's about getting the emotions at the time. You know, somebody like Jason Plato, people always say, oh, you love interviewing Jason, don't you? Actually, Jason could be the biggest pain in the arse to interview, because he would know that when I'm on a grid walk, I've got a certain amount of time, and he'd just keep talking and talking and talking. And he'd be looking at me and going, get yourself out of this one, because I know you want to talk to two other drivers, and I'm just going to carry on talking. And so he could be a real bugger on occasions, but by the same token, he always gave you really interesting stuff. So I think, you know, every driver on their day can be brilliant, and every driver on their day can be a little shit. Excuse the language, but it's quite true.
Thank you.
I'm just wondering, what's next? Do you have any ambitions you haven't yet achieved that you would like to?
dare I say it, I'd quite like to retire and do some more travelling.
Oh,
Honestly,
yeah.
I've never really, it sounds a bit bizarre, but I've never really, I think I've always been ambitious, but I've never had any set ambitions. I've never, I'll often say I'm still waiting to work out what I want to be when I grow up, because I've never had a set idea about I want to do this, I want to do that. So I just like to keep an open eye and see what life throws at me, and then hopefully it's going to be something that's fun. But I think, no, work-wise, there's nothing that I could say I desperately want to do this or desperately want to do that. The only thing I definitely want to do is do some more travelling at some point.
Is there just one final thing? When you started off in Formula One and compare it to now, is there a better acceptance of women in motor racing? Certainly there are more of them in engineering and all the rest of it. Have you noticed that?
I think this is, I mean, I never felt, and I can only speak from personal experience, I never felt that I wasn't accepted, but I do accept the fact that I'm 5'10" and bossy. So I think that's really helped. And I think if you look at a lot of the women from my era, as it were, who started out then, you did have to be quite forceful and to, you know, fight your own way in order, which isn't right, it shouldn't be like that, but that's just how it was. So I think, and I was lucky enough to start in Formula One, which is, they just want the best people, really. It's about having enough diversity amongst the people, amongst the best people, because, and at the moment there are more women, there are more people from a more diverse range of you know, both ethnic and you know, financial backgrounds getting into the sport, but still not as much as it could be. It is still, you know, to a lesser extent, but right, numbers wise it's still dominated by white men.
Yeah.
Well,
but,
with
yeah,
notable exception of being the new Bernie, is it? Well, because there's another Bernie now in Formula One, and Maurice is currently working with Bernie Collins, another Ulster person. So
yes, she's the. If you watch ITV, you will be aware that she's
Sky.
Excuse me. The strategist who was with Aston Martin is now
very smart lady.
Yeah, and I'm happy to say I'm doing a book with her. So.
And we're working on doing the launch of the book here at Brooklyn, so more on that later in the year. So that would be, and to get Bernie to come and do a talk, which would be fantastic from a female engineer perspective, would be really unusual.
Yeah.
Talking about women in sport, and obviously you've been successful on the fringe of the sport. Is there ever going to be a successful Formula One female driver?
I would like to think so. It's not going to happen in the short term. I'm not a great believer in I think it's a numbers game. So I think if you look at the amount of young boys that start karting, very few of them get to the top. There are a lot less girls that start karting, therefore it's more difficult. So what we need to do is to get more young girls starting at grassroots level. I think we need to, and as is already happening, they are actually looking into the design of the cars, to see whether, you know, things, I say little things, but they're big things when you're driving a racing car, the thickness of the wheel, you know, that they're traditionally designed for men's hands, in the same way that a steering, you know, a seatbelt in a car was designed for man's physiology and height and weight. It's always very much been the same for a racing car as well. So I think it will take time, but I can't see, I'm a hugely competitive woman who likes driving cars fast, so I can't see why why there aren't other hugely competitive women who like driving cars fast who, given a level playing field, wouldn't be able to get there. But will there be as many women? Maybe not, but there's going to be one out there somewhere.
Louise, I'm sure that I can think of other things I want to discuss with you, but it's gone 9 o'clock, so I think we'll need to call it a day. Yes. So big round of applause, please, for Louise Goodman.